Imagine a tense scene. You find yourself in the center of a fierce argument. Your heart is racing, every word feels like a sharp weapon, and every sentence feels like a battlefield. You carefully weigh each answer you give, trying to prove your point. But your opponent is doing the same, and neither of you is really listening, just waiting for the moment to counterattack. And here comes a certain observer. Let's designate him as N. He does not take sides or tell you what you should say. Instead, he quietly whispers something discouraging in your ear. You've already lost. What does he mean? You are actively fighting, defending your beliefs and asserting your position. How can that be a defeat? According to N, the very moment you engage in such a confrontation, you have already surrendered, giving up your true power. He argues that true strength lies not in the struggle to be right, but in something much more unexpected. So what is this hidden power, and why is silence sometimes more eloquent than words? Let's dive into his philosophy and uncover the silent technique that gives you real power. This journey to understanding promises to redefine your ideas about power and persuasion, offering unexpected insights. It is widely believed that the source of power is winning verbal battles, proving others' judgments wrong, and dominating conversations. Friedrich Nietzsche, however, had a radically different viewpoint. He was convinced that true power lies not in the ability to speak, but in the ability to control the situation. But why do people get into arguments? Think of how quickly things get heated in the heat of a debate. Have you ever wondered what makes people argue? Nietzsche argued that most arguments arise not from a desire for truth, but from deeper psychological needs. First, there is the defense of one's own ego. People argue because their self-esteem is threatened. Admitting one's wrong is perceived as a loss of a part of oneself, and the mind desperately resists it. Second, it is a power struggle. Many debates are not a contest of facts or logic, but real battles for dominance. Who will have the last word? Who will set the tone of the conversation? Who will make the opponent back down? Third, there is the mentality and the desire for social approval. Some people get into arguments not because they sincerely believe in their point of view, but because they want to appear smart, confident, and strong in the eyes of others. N interpreted this manner of behavior as a manifestation of a lack of inner strength. In his opinion, people who are prone to emotional outbursts during discussions lose control over themselves in the situation. He was convinced that if you let your opponent throw you off balance, defeat becomes inevitable. Nietzsche's philosophical concept of the will to power and the image of the Superman, Übermensch, deserves special attention. The common interpretation of the will to power as a desire for physical superiority is erroneous. In reality, it is about man's ability to shape reality in accordance with his will. And to achieve this goal, it is not necessary to resort to verbal battles. Sometimes, true power is manifested in the ability to restrain one's reactions and emotions. This is where the Übermensch, the pinnacle of human development in Nietzsche's philosophy, enters the scene. Unlike the average person, the Übermensch does not allow emotions to take over reason. He does not engage in arguments for the sake of arguing, nor does he seek to prove himself right at all costs. Instead, he carefully weighs when to enter into a discussion and when it is better to remain silent. After all, true power lies not in eloquence, but in the ability to control the course of any interaction. As an illustration, we can give an example of a business meeting where two opponents are facing each other. One of them, raising his voice and showing aggression, is trying to prove his point. The other, remaining calm and cool, prefers to listen attentively rather than speak. He does not allow himself to be involved in violent emotional battles. However, when he does find it necessary to speak out, his words have incredible power, always hit the target, and can dramatically change the direction of the conversation. Who really has the true power? N would undoubtedly argue that he who keeps his cool and does not give in to emotional impulses ultimately prevails. But why does strategic silence prove more effective than winning verbal battles? Silence, when used skillfully, is not a manifestation of weakness, but a powerful psychological weapon. It encourages the interlocutor to reveal more and more information about himself, makes him feel insecure, doubt his own words. Silence creates tension, and tension, in turn, causes discomfort, which allows people to gain control over the situation. Übermensch doesn't just keep silence in arguments, he uses it as a strategic tool. A pause taken in time, a moment of restraint, a timely response that turns the tide of the conversation in his favor is what sets him apart. That is why, according to N, True power lies not in the struggle itself, but in the ability to master the battlefield before it begins. Silence is not just the absence of words, it is a powerful tool, a weapon wielded by the greatest minds in history to win intellectual disputes in business and in war. The idea of domination espoused by N was not about spectacular battles or verbal triumphs, but about the ability to exert influence, control, and strategic prudence. As an illustration of this principle, it is worth looking to three outstanding personalities whose names have become legendary: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. The Socratic method of achieving superiority was to win without direct confrontation. The philosopher avoided traditional arguments, did not raise his voice, did not resort to attacks, and did not seek to impose his point of view at all costs. Instead, he skillfully employed a method with such power that it still influences intellectual debate today. The essence of the Socratic method was the ability to ask questions in such a way that the interlocutor would come to identify his own contradictions. Let's imagine a situation. An arrogant Athenian politician proclaims his outstanding wisdom in public. Instead of openly disputing this claim, Socrates asks a simple question: what is wisdom? In an effort to affirm his superior intellect, the politician begins to provide a definition. However, with each new question Socrates asks, this definition becomes more and more vague and contradictory. As a result, the man, previously full of self-confidence, begins to stammer and confuse his own words, realizing that he does not really have a clear idea of the concept he has been so bragging about. Socrates, being a wise philosopher, did not resort to directly pointing out the mistakes of his interlocutors. Instead, he skillfully guided them to realize the truth on their own. He deeply understood that people truly accept only those ideas and conclusions that they arrive at on their own. This is the essence of the quiet power of persuasion. Instead of engaging in fruitless verbal battles, it is much more effective to ask questions that cause people to question their own beliefs and attitudes. Steve Jobs, for his part, used a different but no less effective strategy: the art of controlled conflict. Unlike Socrates, who dominated with questions, Jobs preferred strategic persuasion. He did not avoid arguments but skillfully organized them, directing the discussion in the right direction. His leadership at Apple was not about personally controlling every detail, but about managing the overall tone and prioritizing the conversation. Jobs had a simple but powerful principle: don't waste energy on idle arguments and minor disagreements. However, when it came to really important issues, he was ready to go all in, defending his position to the end. One prime example is his famous battle with his own development team over the design of the iPhone. The engineers insisted on the need for physical buttons, while Jobs firmly believed in the concept of an all-touch screen. Instead of engaging in endless bickering, he managed to convince them that he was right, making them see the promise and innovation of his vision. He let the discussions flow, allowed doubts to be raised, and skillfully guided their thinking until they realized that sensor devices were not just a likely prospect, but a coming reality. He did not impose ready-made solutions, but slowly led people to believe that they had come to this point themselves. Often people engage in arguments out of vanity, seeking to assert their own rightness. But Steve Jobs was arguing for a different purpose, not to prove superiority, but to persuade and enthuse. This is the key point. Words must inspire action, otherwise they become empty sound. Let's look at the example of Miyamoto Musashi, a little talked about samurai who was victorious before the fight even began. Leaving aside philosophy and business strategies, let's go to the battlefield. The invincible Musashi learned a simple truth: the best way to win a battle is not to draw your sword from its sheath. Having won more than 60 fights, he relied on more than just physical prowess. His triumphs were psychological triumphs. He played intellectual games, confounding his opponents before the battle even began. His duel with Sasaki Kojiro is a prime example. Kojiro, a renowned master of the blade whose speed was awe-inspiring, met an unexpected opponent in the person of Musashi. The latter, contrary to expectations, did not engage in open confrontation, but chose the path of psychological pressure. Musashi deliberately threw Kojiro off balance by showing up hours late for the fight. Fury clouded the swordsman's mind, provoking fatal mistakes that led to his defeat. Musashi, as if embodying Nietzsche's philosophy of the superhuman, demonstrated that true strength lies not in blind reaction, but in the ability to manage the emotions of others. He proved that endurance, patience, and psychological superiority are sometimes more powerful than brute force. There is an important message in this story. Power can be gained through strategic silence. What do such different personalities as Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi have in common? They all knew how to conserve energy by avoiding pointless arguments. They didn't give in to impulsive reactions, but determined the rules of the game, realizing that true influence lies not in words, but in the ability to shape the situation. The next time I am tempted to get into an argument, I should ask myself, am I not just a puppet of my own emotions, or am I in control? True power lies in the ability to remain silent. Why do people engage in fruitless arguments, feeling the need to assert their point of view and defend their beliefs, even when it brings no results? Many people mistakenly believe that the purpose of arguing is to establish the truth, but in reality, arguing is a struggle for influence. By engaging in arguments, a person unwittingly reveals weaknesses such as insecurity and emotional vulnerabilities, demonstrating that their reactions are controlled by their opponent. N was deeply aware of this pattern. His concept of the will to power was not only about physical superiority, but also about the ability to control oneself enough to influence others, even if they do not realize it. Modern psychological research confirms N's insight. So why do people fall into the trap of arguing? The fact is that arguments are not logical, but are driven by psychological factors. By engaging in an argument, a person is sure he or she is defending their beliefs, but often they are simply reacting to deep-seated psychological triggers. Cognitive distortions cause the brain to seek to win rather than to gain new knowledge. The human brain, that complex organ, is susceptible to cognitive distortions that make it very difficult to have rational discussions. Among the most common and influential of these are the following. First and foremost is confirmation bias, where an individual tends to seek and perceive only information that is consistent with their already held beliefs, ignoring or discarding anything that contradicts them. Further, the backward effect manifests itself in the fact that when confronted with arguments that refute beliefs, the individual not only does not change his or her point of view, but, on the contrary, becomes even more entrenched in it, strengthening his or her original position. Finally, the Dunning-Kruger effect demonstrates a paradoxical situation in which people with little knowledge in a certain area are overconfident in their judgments, while competent experts tend to be more modest in their assessments. These distortions lead to the fact that many debates become fruitless and unconstructive. Discussants often do not seek to understand their opponent's point of view, but only wait for their turn to make their own arguments. In contrast, the superhuman, a concept developed by Friedrich Nietzsche, avoids this common trap. He listens carefully, observes what is going on, and carefully weighs the appropriateness of entering the conversation before making a final decision. Emotional triggers play a special role in the perception of disputes, which explain why some discussions elicit strong emotional reactions and others leave one indifferent. It is important to realize that most debates are not about logical arguments, but about identity issues. When there is a deep disagreement involving fundamental beliefs and values, it is perceived as a personal insult or challenge. This is why discussions on sensitive topics, be it politics, religion, or philosophy, often degenerate into fierce battles. The reason lies in the fact that criticism of ideas is perceived as a personal insult, as an attack against the individual. Historical experience shows that prominent figures of the past did not allow emotions to prevail in polemics. The ability to arouse emotions in an opponent is tantamount to establishing control over him. The Superman, as Nietzsche defines it, avoids this trap by remaining an unperturbed observer, analyzing the situation and only then deciding on the appropriateness of a response. The desire for approval is the true background of most arguments. Often, it is not the search for truth, but banal ego that is at the heart of the controversy. It is not enough for a man to be right. He needs others to recognize his rightness. Nietzsche shrewdly observed that most people seek approval from the crowd, participating in debates not for the sake of truth, but for the sake of confirming their importance. The Superman, however, does not need such approval. He creates his own truth. It is enough to remember the most influential historical figures. Did they waste their time on fruitless arguments with critics? Not at all. They focused on realizing their vision, ignoring distractions, and letting their deeds speak for themselves, rising above the flood of empty words. N proved to be a visionary whose reflections on the power, control, and meaning of silence find striking confirmation in the latest psychological research. Let us consider this assertion in more detail. The modern science of social interactions confirms that true influence in society belongs not to those who talk without speaking, but to those who skillfully manage the flow of conversation. These people do not resort to interruptions or unnecessary explanations. They weigh every word, making those around them eagerly catch every utterance. This is why true leaders rarely raise their voices. They simply don't need to. Their words carry weight because they have already surrounded themselves with an aura of power and authority cultivated by silence. In behavioral psychology, there is also evidence that people who maintain equanimity and composure in discussions are much more persuasive than those who give in to emotion. The reason lies in the fact that calmness is subconsciously perceived as a sign of confidence. N deeply believed that true strength originates in the ability to master oneself. A superhuman, in his opinion, should not be a slave to his own emotions. Instead of impulsive reactions, he ponders every move, which makes him virtually invulnerable. The real reason why N saw greatness in silence lies not in the desire to avoid disagreement, but in the realization that he who owns himself owns the situation. Let's look at a concrete example. If someone allows himself to be insulted and immediately responds, he loses control. If someone feels the need to defend themselves in response to a challenge, they are in a losing position. If a person is dragged into a pointless argument to prove a point, he is defeated. However, if he keeps his cool, observes, and responds only when it suits his interests, victory is already on his side. The philosophy of N is not in eternal silence, but in the ability to choose moments to speak out. It is important to ask oneself, does he speak out of sincere desire or out of a sense of duty? Is he reacting under the influence of emotion, or is he controlling his reaction? Is the argument worth the energy expended, or is it merely an indulgence of one's ego? The real power, according to N, lies not in the words spoken, but in the silence that precedes them. In the pause that makes others freeze in anticipation, in the ability to speak only when it is really important. The skillful mastery of silence opens the door to true power. However, a legitimate question arises. Should one always remain silent? Silence is undoubtedly a powerful weapon, but its thoughtless use can be as foolish as thoughtless talk. If silence were the only path to power, the greatest thinkers, revolutionaries, and visionaries in human history would have gone unheard. But they were not silent, for true power lies not in avoiding confrontation, but in discerning when to engage and when it is more prudent to remain silent. In his philosophy of the will to power, Friedrich Nietzsche saw conflict as a path to self-improvement. It is a common misconception that Nietzsche called for withdrawal from struggle and detachment, but his concept of the will to power implied a desire for dominance, personal growth, and overcoming one's own limitations. Power lies not only in silence, but also in self-control. The total avoidance of conflict is not a manifestation of wisdom, but rather fear skillfully disguised as prudence. Mastering the art of conflict does not mean denying it, but using it as a tool to achieve goals. Nietzsche's Superman will not engage in pointless disputes over trifles, but at the same time, he will not shy away from the battles that are necessary for his development and self-realization. Deep down, man realizes that the clash of opinions can be the very forge where character is forged and true strength is born. But then why do most of us instinctively avoid sharp corners and prefer to avoid any manifestation of confrontation? The answer is simple: discomfort. It is this feeling that makes us run away from disputes like fire. However, as Nietzsche ingeniously pointed out, it is in discomfort that the source of our strength lies. He saw struggle not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as an essential necessity, as an integral part of the process of personality formation. Weak minds, like fearful hares, shy away from any challenge, while strong minds, on the contrary, welcome it with open arms. After all, it is the challenge that makes us grow, develop, and become better. Let us imagine a warrior who never engages in battle. His blade, never once tested in battle, would remain untempered, unfit for real combat. Similarly, the mind that is never challenged is doomed to remain dull, weak, and vulnerable. Without intellectual confrontations, our ideas remain untested, like flimsy air castles. Without struggle, our beliefs remain empty, devoid of any substance. Just think of some of the boldest thinkers in human history. Galileo Galilei was severely condemned for daring to challenge established church dogma about the structure of the universe. Socrates was condemned to death for questioning conventional beliefs by forcing people to think for themselves. Even Nietzsche himself was once considered by many to be insane. And yet, today his ideas continue to have a huge influence on modern thought, shaping our view of the world and ourselves. Their power did not grow out of silence, but out of the ability to judiciously choose battles and engage in necessary confrontations. It is important to understand the fundamental difference between polemics, which aim to prove one's own infallibility, and debates aimed at creating a new reality, and realize this fully. Prominent leaders, thinkers, and prophets do not shy away from controversy, but use it as a strategic weapon. Consider Socrates. He did not attack other people's beliefs directly, but scrutinized them until they crumbled under the weight of their own contradictions. N's writings were designed to stir minds, provoke discussion, and bring people out of intellectual hibernation. Steve Jobs did not avoid conflict. He used it to force people to overcome their own limitations and stimulate innovation. Influential individuals engage in controversy not for self-assertion, but for transformation. They fight not to win the debate, but to shape the world to fit their vision. Superhumans argue not to satisfy their egos, but to achieve a specific goal. This is when you should engage, when the debate sharpens your thinking, when it reveals deeper truths, when it stimulates your personal growth or the growth of others, when it shifts the balance of power in your favor. However, there are situations when you should refrain from polemics. When the dispute is motivated only by the desire to defend your own ego, when the opponent is not ready to accept new ideas, when the debate turns into a fruitless emotional wrangle, or when silence itself becomes a powerful tool of influence. Pointless arguments are a sign of weakness, while reasoned and strategic discussions demonstrate strength. N did not avoid disagreement. He accepted conflict as an integral part of interaction, but always remained true to his principles. If participation in a dispute exhausts and weakens, it is prudent to avoid it. If, on the other hand, controversy strengthens and gives you confidence, you should engage in it. If controversy distracts from important goals, it should be ignored. Conflict that fosters growth and development is not something to be avoided, but is an area in which to improve. True strength lies not only in the ability to remain silent, but also in the ability to determine when to speak and when to refrain from speaking. If a person had to choose between giving up arguments forever or mastering the art of influencing through conflict, which would make him stronger? Let's imagine a situation. A person wakes up and learns that he has only 100 words left to say in his entire life. Each word becomes of great value, and the choice of the moment to speak becomes critical. In today's world, where information flows in a continuous stream, every utterance takes on a special significance. It is worth considering whether a person is ready to waste his words in the heat of meaningless polemics, or in futile attempts to convince those who are deaf to other people's arguments? Or would he prefer to ponder every word, like a skillful warrior preparing his blade for a decisive battle? This is the true power available to the few. N realized a profound truth that escapes the attention of most. Words are a valuable asset, a kind of currency. The more carelessly a person spends his vocabulary, the faster his influence depreciates. Let's imagine a typical situation. A heated argument, the heart is racing, the mind feverishly generates arguments and objections. Unbearably eager to prove their case, but you should stop and ask yourself the question, who really has the power at this moment? Is it the one who is desperate to convince his opponent, or the one who has mastered the art of silence? Silence is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful strategic position. It is a tool of control that allows you to plant doubts in the minds of others without resorting to excessive persuasion. This is the true art of managing a situation. So here's a practical exercise. The next time the urge to engage in an argument arises, take a conscious pause. Instead of reacting impulsively, observe from the sidelines. Observe how the people around you unwittingly show their vulnerabilities. Notice how fears and doubts come through their speech, giving away their inner state. At the right moment, carefully choose the words like a skillful master, or prefer a wise silence. After all, true strength often lies in the ability to restrain yourself. If you are interested in deep knowledge in the field of philosophy, psychology, and mechanisms of power, Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so that you do not miss interesting analytical materials that reveal the essence of our thoughts and life attitudes. Keep your mind clear and stay strong in